quantitative easing 2. Let's see what they have to say about QE2. That's where we monetize debt. Remember these terms, monetize debt.
Did you hear about the Fed?
No, what about the Fed?
They announced another round of the quantitative easing.
What does that mean?
It means they are going to make large asset purchases via PAMO.
What does that mean?
It means they are going to expand their balance sheet and buy treasuries.
What does that mean?
It means they are going to print a ton of money.
So why do they call it the quantitative easing? Why don't they just call it the printing money?
Because the printing money is the last refuge of failed economic empires and banana republics, and the Fed doesn't want to admit this is their only idea.
So why do they want to print the money?
Because they say we have the deflation, and the deflation is very bad.
What is the deflation?
The deflation is when prices of the things we buy go down.
Isn't that good? Doesn't it mean the people can buy more of the stuff?
Yes, but the Fed said this is bad, especially during the recession.
So they think that during the recession, when the people have less money to buy the stuff, it is bad that the prices go down?
Yes, the Fed would rather have the inflation.
So why does the Fed think we have the deflation?
Because the CPI said so.
But aren't the food prices higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the gas prices higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the healthcare costs higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't tuition prices higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the taxes higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the subway fares higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the stock prices higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the bond prices higher than a year ago?
Yes.
So what is deflating right now?
The only thing deflating that I can see is the Fed's credibility.
Did they have a lot of credibility to start with?
No.
Why not?
Because the Fed has been wrong about every major economic development in the past 20 years.
You mean they didn't see the internet stock bubble?
No. In fact, they helped fuel the internet stock bubble.
And they didn't see the housing bubble?
No, in fact, they helped cause the housing bubble.
And they didn't see the subprime crisis?
No, in fact, they told us subprime problems were contained right before the shit hit the fan and the Lehman went bankrupt.
So has the Fed ever been right about anything?
Let me see if I can think of anything. Nope, nothing.
Who runs the Fed?
The Fed is run by the Ben Bernanke.
Does the Ben Bernanke have a lot of business experience?
No, the Ben Bernanke has no business experience.
Does the Ben Bernanke have a lot of policy experience?
No, the Ben Bernanke has no policy experience.
Has the Ben Bernanke ever run in an election?
No, the Ben Bernanke has never run in an election.
So what qualifies him to run the Fed?
I don't know, maybe the fact that he has a nice beard.
But my plumber also has a nice beard, and I would not trust him to play God with the economy.
No, although when you call the plumber to fix something that is broken, they usually fix it, not break it more.
This is true. The plumber is clearly smarter than the Ben Bernanke.
Well, that is why he became a plumber, and not an economist.
How does the Fed execute the quantitative easing?
They print the money, and then they buy the treasury bonds.
Do they buy the treasury bonds from the Treasury Department?
No, they buy the treasury bonds from the Goldman Sachs.
So let me get this straight. If I want to buy the treasury bonds with my money, I can buy them directly from the Treasury.
Yes.
And if you want to buy the treasury bonds with your money, you can buy them from the Treasury.
Right.
But if the Ben Bernanke wants to buy the treasury bonds using the American people's money, he does not buy them from the Treasury, he buys them from the Goldman Sachs?
Exactly.
And does the Goldman Sachs give him a good price?
Of course not, they are the Goldman Sachs, they make their living ripping off the American people.
But how is the Goldman Sachs able to do this?
The Fed announces what it is going to buy, and when it is going to buy, before it does the trade.
So the Goldman Sachs can front-run the Fed, and give them the worst possible price on the treasury bonds?
Yes, exactly.
And the Fed is okay with this blatant theft from the American people?
Of course, otherwise, the Fed would just buy the treasury bonds directly from the Treasury Department.
Who inside the Fed is responsible for the buying of the treasury bonds?
The buying of the treasury bonds is conducted by the New York branch of the Federal Reserve.
And who is in charge of the New York branch?
The head of the New York branch is the William Dudley.
And what did the William Dudley do before running the New York Fed?
Before running the New York Fed, the William Dudley was a partner at the Goldman Sachs.
So the guy in charge of the American people's money when dealing with the Goldman Sachs used to be a partner at the Goldman Sachs?
Yes.
And nobody has a problem with this?
Apparently not.
Is this an episode of The Twilight Zone?
I don't think so.
Are you sure?
Pretty sure.
So what you are telling me is that the Fed thinks prices are going down, when in fact they are going up?
Yeah.
And they think during the recession, with the high unemployment, it is better if the things people need to buy cost more money.
Correct. According to the Bernanke, the inflation will create the jobs and improve the housing market.
Has this ever been tried before?
Yes, just last year the Fed tried the quantitative easing with $2 trillion.
Did that create the jobs?
No.
Did it help the housing market?
Not at all.
Did it help anybody at all?
Yes, it helped the Goldman Sachs.
How much of the money are they printing now?
$600 billion.
So even though the first $2 trillion did not create the jobs or improve the housing market, the Fed decided to do another $600 billion anyway?
Yes.
Who put the Bernanke in charge?
The Bernanke was first appointed by the President Bush, then he was reappointed by the President Obama.
But wasn't the President Obama supposed to bring the change?
Yes.
How is putting in charge the same fool, who has been wrong about everything, the change?
Well, under the President Bush, the Bernanke only blew up the American economy. Under the President Obama, he is working on blowing up the entire global economy.
That does not sound like the change we can believe in.
Definitely not.
Who else supports the Bernanke?
Most economists around the world think the quantitative easing is very dangerous.
Does anyone think it is a good idea?
Yes, the people at the Goldman Sachs.
Is this some kind of nightmare?
No, it is very real.
I want to bang my head against the wall.
You should not do that.
Why not?
Because the healthcare is too expensive.
But didn't the President Obama fix that?
No. But that is the subject of a whole other video. Goodbye.
So QE2, monetizing debt, printing money. What does that do with the value of the money that your mother's, if she's on a fixed income and she's trying to survive, what happens if your mother's money's worth less tomorrow? What happens if it buys less the next year? At some point, is your mother eating cat food? At some point, does she have to, how do these bankers take over? See what they did to Europe? Watch what they're doing to Ireland. Here's a little piece. Here's a little bit of Max Kaiser on, hey, Ireland.
If Europe's single currency fails, so will the Union itself. The warning comes from the EU president, who was speaking ahead of the meeting of the Eurozone's finance ministers. Ireland and Portugal appear most at risk and could be forced to use EU bailout money to save them from bankruptcy. Portugal's foreign minister says his country may even be forced to quit the euro. Let's now talk about Europe's crisis with financial analyst Max Kaiser, the man loved by the people, hated by the banks. And hello to you. So tell me, do you believe the EU really is in danger of collapsing?
Well, why doesn't the EU investigate? Well, let me explain something. The EU right now is investigating criminal fraudulent activity over there at the Anglo-Irish Bank. $451 million of illegal loans that are now parked in offshore accounts. Implicated are Sean Fitzpatrick, David Drum, Sean Quinn, the financial terrorists that are taking Ireland down. What's the government doing? Well, the last we heard from them, they were drinking heavily and hiding under their desks. Why not just investigate the criminal activity first? Put the financial terrorists in jail, then figure out what to do with the currency.
Now, Max, let's talk about solutions here, because there are fears the contagion from Ireland's crippled banking system may spread. But if it agrees to an EU bailout, wouldn't that solve the problem for Ireland and possibly the whole Union?
Absolutely not, unless Ireland's willing to give up its sovereignty, unless Ireland is willing to become a debt slave, unless Ireland wants its affairs conducted by the IMF. And the IMF, everywhere they've gone, they've brought destruction and economic mayhem. They're licking their chops waiting to get in there to cause havoc, pay themselves huge fees, give bonuses to their cadre of crony capitalists and terrorist bankers, and Ireland is quaking in its boots, and the government, unfortunately, in Ireland is not standing up for the people. It's abdicated its role as representative of the people. The people in Ireland are getting completely hammered by these banking financial terrorists.
All right, so Max, I'm sorry, you're saying that instead of taking a loan out from the European Union, you're saying the IMF is not an option either?
No, the IMF is not an option for any country that wants to remain out of the clutches of speculators and fraudulent bankers who have done all they can possibly do to steal a country's wealth, load it with debt. The The IMF and the EU and the ECB caused Ireland's crisis. So why are you going to them to ask you to solve the crisis? They're the ones that caused the crisis. Ireland needs to divorce itself from these financial terrorists and stand on its own 2 feet.
Well, let's turn our attention to Portugal now, if we can. Portugal says that it may have to leave the euro. How do you think that would affect its own domestic economy?
Well, I mean, it's the same case, whether it's Portugal, Ireland, Greece, or any of these other European countries. They all are facing the same problem. Bankers have been allowed to conduct fraudulent activity. Look what happened in Greece, for example. They allowed Goldman Sachs to come in and advise them on entering into the euro. Goldman Sachs got them to cook their books and commit fraud. And now they're in dire straits. So now who do they ask to help them get out of their problem? Well, they ask representatives from Goldman Sachs. This is a case of Stockholm Syndrome. These countries are being held captive by financial terrorists, and to get out of their problem, they're asking the same financial terrorists, please, sir, how do we escape the clutches of your terrorism? You know, Ireland, they went to war against the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, but they seem to just give a pass to, Sean Fitzpatrick. How come Sean Fitzpatrick hasn't been executed by the state for financial crimes? Why? Why is he allowed to go free? He's a terrorist. Why is the Irish government soft on terrorism?
All right, Max, if we may, let's turn our attention to the past week of economic news here. We had the APEC summit just a few days ago in Yokohama, Japan. Before that, we had the G20 in Seoul. And really the only agreement or possible agreement to come out of the G20 in Seoul was America and China agreeing to perhaps scale back on their currency wars. Do you see that as a substantive agreement, or do you think the currency wars will continue? And can you just simplify, what exactly is a currency war?
Well, the currency wars are all the various countries around the world trying to debase their own currency to make their exports competitive. So the United States, because they have no ability to engineer any growth in the U.S., because they have spent all their money committing mass murder in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, want countries like China to voluntarily adjust their currency to help Americans continue to overconsume. And China is saying, no, we don't think that's a good idea anymore. So China is engaged in bilateral currency swaps with Russia, Iran, Brazil, to give everybody huge stockpiles of each other's currency so that these countries can do business outside of the U.S. dollar as reserve currency. And this is what we're talking about. The currency war is a post-U.S. dollar as reserve currency era. And as Robert Zoellick has said just recently, he's looking for a new global currency with some kind of gold component, as the U.S. dollar reserve currency era is now finished.
All right, financial analyst and host of the Kaiser Report, Max Kaiser, live in Paris. Thank you.
Another good one for you, because I gave you a little Gerald Celente, right? Gave you a little bit of Max Kaiser. Let's go back with some Gerald, okay? Here's a little thing in the U.S. media and stuff.
Now, while millions of Americans are unemployed and the national debt is soaring, it seems top financial executives are far from feeling the pinch. A recent Wall Street Journal survey estimates they'll receive a staggering $144 billion in compensation and benefits this year. This amount is equal to the U.S. stimulus package approved by Congress in 2008. Well, trend forecaster Gerald Celente says Americans are failing to react to the payouts because the financier's fan base in the mainstream media is distracting public opinion.
You have a complete disconnect here going on between these white shoe boys with their $144 billion and the rest of the country. And that's why the people they're kind of numb about this. When you break this number down, we're talking about $144 billion. That would rank number 49 in the GDP of the world's countries, of 194 countries. Take, for instance, this guy, Steve Schwarzman, the CEO of Blackstone. I think he's like worth about $6 billion. He complained that because of changes in tax rules, and he would have to pay more money. Quote, he said it was the equivalent of the Nazis invading Poland.